Hello, I'm Rosemary Balu, and I'm the founding and current managing editor of Art BOP, the Bay of Plenty's creative arts magazine. Within Art BOP, we have a section called Stuff to Say, in which contributors can publish their opinions and concerns about matters within the creative arts sector and the wider community. Now, last week, I published an article in Stuff to Say, and it was about the proposal by the current trustees of TECT, and what they're planning to do is to amend the trust deed of the Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust to transfer all of the assets in that trust to one of the beneficiaries, the TECT Charitable Trust. In doing that, it ultimately deprives the wider beneficiary group and the consumers of their asset base. I thought I'd have a quick look at how we ended up with a Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust. Originally, there was the Tauranga Electric Power Board, and following a government change in policy, the undertaking of the Tauranga Electric Power Board was put into a limited liability company, Trust Power. The shares, part of the shareholding in Trust Power, was settled, or that's put into the Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust for the benefit of the customers. Also, small parcels of shares in Trust Power went to the existing Tauranga Electric Power Board individual customers and account holders. Over time, those little parcels of shares have been traded and aggregated, and also the Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust TECT has sold shares. In 2015 it sold 20 million shares, and its shareholding has gone from just over 51% in Trust Power now down to about just over 26%. There's a number of other shareholders in Trust Power. The biggest is a company called Infratil, but pardon me, there's also other corporate and institutional shareholders. So part of the asset base of the TECT Trust are the shares in Trust Power, and the income from the income of the TECT Trust, the Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust, comes from its share investments. There are other shareholdings now, because that's been part of the policy of the trustees of the Consumer Trust, and they've used the money from the sale of Trust Power shares to extend and expand the base of their share portfolio. Now, the income, and they can also, if they decide, pay out capital, that's done at the discretion of the trustees for the time being, and they can decide there can be a payment to any of the beneficiaries, and we call that the TECT check. What we generally don't know is that there are three classes of beneficiaries specified in the TECT, the Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust deed. The original beneficiaries, the consumers, and they're in the first category. Now, within the category or type of, there are different types of consumers. There's the ordinary consumer, but there's also the organisations who qualify as people who can get a grant from the charitable trust. So within the category 1, there are consumers in terms of the current proposal who have competing interests. The charitable trust was added in 2002, and that's the organisation through which the trustees, who are the same as the Energy Consumer Trust, allocate money into the community. The third category of beneficiary, that's a person entitled to the assets of the trust, are any other TECT entity, and I'll just read that for you. Any other entity wholly owned and or controlled by TECT and whose beneficiaries and objectives are substantially the same as TECT's. Now, all of the documents are obtainable from the offices of TECT on Cameron Road. There's a bit to read, but it is worthwhile having a read and having the documents. Now, today the assets of TECT, the Consumer Trust, and that is including all their shareholdings and assets, and you can get a copy of their financial accounts from TECT. These are generally worth between $760 and $800 million, depending on who's telling you. These assets, the Consumer Trust assets, Tauranga Energy Consumer Trust, they're held in the trust by the trustees for and on behalf of all the beneficiaries. That's all three categories. However, in that proposal they sent out, what they're wanting to do is to give all of the assets to the charitable trust. Okay? And you're being asked to agree to a transfer of the assets. If you agree that it's a good idea that all of the assets of the Consumer Trust go into the charitable trust, there'd be an initial payout of $2,500, and then over 5 years the cheques, or a cheque, would be sent to you if you're an ongoing consumer of Trustpower, and each of those cheques would be about $360. Now, I've taken all those figures out of the information that has been sent to me from TECT in relation to the proposal. Whether or not you think that's a good idea is up to you. If you read my article, you'll see that I have significant reservations about the process and the disclosure of information that the trustees have used. I'd recommend that you read as much as possible, and that before the 1st of March you make a submission, and that you ask to be heard, and in particular that you make sure you vote, because the trustees have added, at the end of the process which is specified in the deed, they've added an extra little bit, and that is that they're asking for a vote, but the vote is not a majority or a significant majority, it's a bare majority of anyone who votes.